Every organization faces the risk of cyber attacks, regardless of organization size, so it's beneficial to perform some form of vulnerability assessment regularly. Larger enterprises and those organizations experiencing ongoing attacks may benefit most. Assessment can be performed by internal IT security teams or outsourced to the third parties that focus on security services. Vulnerability assessment is a systematic review of security weaknesses and flaws in an information system by defining, identifying, classifying, and prioritizing vulnerabilities in a system, application, and networks. It evaluates if the system is susceptible to any known vulnerabilities, their relevance, and how they may impact the environment by assigning severity levels to those vulnerabilities, and recommends remediations or mitigations if and whenever needed. Vulnerability assessment provides clear, actionable information on all identified threats and the corrective actions that will be needed. This allows risk managers to prioritize fixes against the overall cybersecurity risk profile of the organization. A good vulnerability assessment approach can significantly reduce exposure to cyber threats and boost your baseline of protections across your organization, systems, and data. There are 4 categories of vulnerability assessment: network, infrastructure, data repositories, and application security. Network, the analysis of mechanism preventing potential unauthorized access to your network, while infrastructure, assessing critical servers from the system operation standpoint. And data repository, checking the data stores for possible flaws, with special attention to the security of the sensitive data. Application security, the detections of vulnerabilities in the source code of the applications using dynamic application security test, DAST, and static application security testing or SAS tools. Bago pa tayo lalalim sa vulnerability assessment, atin munang alamin kung ano ang vulnerability at paano ito nire-rate ang severity. As defined by NIST, a vulnerability is a weakness in an information system, security procedures, internal controls, or implementation that could exploit or triggered by threat source. Vulnerabilities can originate from many factors, including a poor design of an application or oversight of the intended actions from a user. There are arguably 5 main categories of vulnerabilities. As a cybersecurity researcher, you will be assessing applications and systems, using vulnerabilities against these targets in a day-to-day life, so it is crucial to become familiar with this discovery and exploitation process. Operation system. These types of vulnerabilities are found in the operating system, or the OS, and often result in privilege escalation. Misconfiguration-based, these types of vulnerabilities stem from an incorrect configured of applications or services. For example, a website exposing customer details or credentials. Weak or default credentials. Application and services that may have an element of authentication will come with the default credentials when installed. For example, an administrator dashboard may have the username and password of admin. These are easy to guess by an attacker. Application logic. These vulnerabilities are a result of a poorly designed application. For example, poorly implemented authentication mechanism that may result in an attacker being able to impersonate a user's or brute force. Human factor vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities that leverage human behavior. For example, phishing emails are designed to trick humans into believing they are legitimate. A vulnerability in cybersecurity is defined as a weakness or flaw in the design, implementation, or behaviors of a system or application. Vulnerability scoring serves a vital role in a vulnerability management and is used to determine the potential risk and impact of a vulnerability may have on a network or a computer system. For example, the popular common vulnerability scoring system is the CVSS, award points to vulnerability based upon its features, availability, and reproducibility, with 3 major iterations. How easy is it to exploit the vulnerability? Do exploits exist for this? How does this vulnerability interfere with the CIE triad? In fact, there are so many variables that you have to use a calculator to figure out the score using this framework. a vulnerability is given a classifications out of 5 depending on the score that has been assigned. The qualitative severity rating scales underscores ranges into the table. Throughout our journey in cybersecurity, we will often come across a magnitude of different applications and services, often have very different designs and behavior, and in turn, potential different vulnerabilities. Thankfully, for the available resources and researcher, there are resources on the internet that keep track of the vulnerabilities for all sorts of software, operating systems, and more. There are 2 databases that we can use to look up on existing vulnerabilities for applications discovered in our InfoSec journey, specifically NVD or the National Vulnerability Database. It is a vulnerabilities are classified under a Common Vulnerabilities and Exposure or a CVE for short. The other one is the Exploit DB. Is a source that we as an ethical hacker will find much more helpful during an assessment. Exploit DB retains exploit for the software and application stored under the name, author, and version of the software or application. We can use Exploit DB to look up for snippets of code known as a proof of concept that are used to exploit a specific vulnerability. The security scanning process consists of 6 steps: preparations, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability identifications, vulnerability analysis, risk assessment, and remediations. Preparations is a decisions needed to be made about which system will be assessed, and you need to define the baseline of each. It is also necessary to establish which systems are critical and which data is sensitive. While vulnerability scanning tools enables quickly identification of existing vulnerability in our system and network, it is crucial to update and correctly configured vulnerability scanners so that the result of the scan are tailored to the needs and in order to minimize a false positive, which can extend the analysis stage. This tool should be able to carry out various types of scanning such as credential and non-credential scan, external vulnerability scans, internal vulnerability scans, and environmental scans. Vulnerability identification or the testing is the objective of the steps is to draft a comprehensive list of an application's vulnerabilities. Security analysts test the security health of the applications, servers, or other systems by scanning them with automated tools or testing and evaluating them manually. Analysts also rely on vulnerability databases, vendor vulnerability announcement, asset management system, and threat intelligence feeds to identify security weaknesses. Vulnerability analysis. The objective of these steps is to identify the source and root cause of vulnerabilities identified in vulnerability scanning. It involves analyzing whether a flagged vulnerability indeed poses a threat to a system. Root cause analysis or RCE is conducted to estimate the potential impact and level of severity. The ability to accurately identify vulnerabilities at this stage we will have a direct impact on a necessary course of action. There are useful tools that will help us efficiently prioritize vulnerabilities in our open source dependencies and containers to focus on what matters. For example, the root cause of vulnerability could be an old version of an open source library. This provides a clear path of remediations, which is upgrading the library. Risk assessment. The objective of this step is the prioritizing of vulnerabilities. It involves security analysts assigning a rank or a severity score to each vulnerability based on such factors as which systems are affected, what data is at risk, which business functions are at risk, easy to track or compromise, severity of an attack, potential damage as a result of the vulnerability. Remediations. The objective of this step is the closing of security gaps. It's typically a joint effort by security staff, development, and operation teams who determine the most effective path of remediations or mitigations of each vulnerability. Specific remediation steps might include introduce a new security procedures, measures, or tools, the updating of operational or configuration changes, the development and implementation of vulnerability patch, Vulnerability assessment cannot be a one-off activity. To be effective, organization must operationalize this process and repeat it regular intervals. Vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Vulnerability assessment intends to identify vulnerabilities in a system, applications, and/or a network. The techniques is used to estimate how susceptible to a different vulnerabilities. Vulnerability assessment, it involves the use of automated network scanning tools whose results are listed in the report. As findings reflected in a vulnerability assessment report are not backed by an attempt to exploit them. Some of them may be false positive. In contrast to vulnerability assessment, penetration testing involves identifying vulnerabilities in a particular network and attempting to exploit them to penetrate into the system. The purpose of penetration testing is to determine whether the detected vulnerability is genuine. If a pen tester managed to exploit potential vulnerable spot, he or she considered it's a genuine and reflects it on the report. The report can also show unexploitable vulnerabilities as theoretical finding. Don't be confused these theoretical findings with a false positive. With penetration testing, an organization can simulate a real-world cyber attack on a targeted assets using the same tools and techniques that the modern cyber criminals use. This is accomplished by understanding who your threats are, their capabilities, motivations, and targets. In addition to evaluating your network, a pen test can also include physical security and social engineering. A pen test simulates as closely as possible the effect that these threats have on your business. Penetration testing should not be done simply to prove you can be hacked or to prove that you are vulnerable. Penetration testing is the most useful for organizations with a strong maturity in their IT security operations. Penetration testing is tailored to your unique infrastructures, applications, and defenses. It can give you an early insight of how a hacker would compromise your system, also ideal if you identify or successfully repelled previous hackers, so you can fix flaws that would allow them to further penetrate your system. When it comes to security, there are no place for oversight or omission, and continuous evaluation of vulnerabilities is the key to creating a more secured environment. Vulnerability assessment tools facilitate the vulnerability assessment process and vulnerability management. By choosing the right tools, you can also minimize the false positive and receive trustworthy data for the assessment. This will help you stay one step ahead of attacker. Automatically find, prioritize, and fix vulnerabilities. Vulnerability management is the process of evaluating, categorizing, and ultimately remediating the threats or vulnerabilities faced by an organization. It is arguably impossible to patch and remedy every single vulnerability in a network or computer system, and sometimes a waste of resources. After all, instead, it is all about addressing the most dangerous vulnerabilities and reducing the likelihood of an attack vector being used to exploit a system. Vulnerability assessment tools are designed to automatically scan for new existing threats that can be target your application. Types of tools that includes web application scanner that tests for and simulate known attack patterns, protocol scanner that searches for vulnerability protocols, ports, and network services, network scanner that help visualize network and discover warnings, signals like stray IP addresses, spoof packets, and suspicious packets generating from a single IP address. It is best practice to schedule a regular automated scan of all critical IT systems. The result of this scan should feed into the organization's ongoing vulnerability assessment process. Tools like Nmap, DERP-B, Metasploit, ExploitDB, Burp Suite, and others are very useful to help us try to find vulnerabilities in a target. In the scanning and enumerating phase, the attacker is interacting with the target to determine its overall attack surface. The attack surface determines what might be vulnerable to in the exploitation phase. These vulnerabilities might be a range of things, anything from a web page not being poorly locked down, a website leaking information, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, or any number of other vulnerabilities. To simplify, enumeration and scanning phases is where we will try to determine what the target might be vulnerable to. For example, one important tool in our arsenal is a tool called Nmap. Nmap is a tool which scans a target and tells us a wide variety of things. What ports are open, the operating system of the target like Windows, Linux, Mac OS, including what version of the operating system, what services are running and what version of the services. For example, just saying FTP or a file transfer protocol is not enough. Nmap can attempt to fingerprint and determine the exact version of the FTP, which may enable us to find a specific vulnerability in the target. Here is a short demonstration of a tool to scan for vulnerability assessment. Paalala lang, ang hacking ay illegal dahil ito ay maaaring ikasisira ng target machine. Hindi layunin ng GSIC na ikay-turuan ng hacking bagkus ipinaalam sa iyo kung ano ang masamang dulot nito. And you are responsible to your action, hindi ang GSIC. Sa demo natin ito, gagamit ako ng free online tool from pentesttools.com. Gamit ang website scanner and network scan OpenVAS to scan the target website na testphp.bonweb.com by Acunetics. Since yung website scanner is in progress, test ko ang target site gamit ang network scan OpenVAS. Since sa Pentest tool may dalawang free scans gamit ang kanilang online website at makakuha ng karagdagang impormasyon. With website scanner results sa ating target site, ating makikita under scan summary na may dalawang high, isang medium at 6 na low at 4 na info at karagdagang information kung kailan isinasagawa at natapos ang scan, scan duration and test performance. Under findings, ating makikita ang pangalan ng vulnerability, ang CVSS or score, CVE number at summary ng vulnerability at kung may available ba siyang exploit at software affected. At ipinapakita rin ang risk descriptions base sa summary ng vulnerability at ang recommendation para ma-minimize yung exploit kung meron man. Under yung scan coverage information, ipinapakita ang list of tests na ginagawa sa naturang target kabilang ang cross-site protections, robot.txt, and others. Ganun din sa network scan OpenVAS. Kung saan may port, status ng port, ang kanyang services, product at version na na-detect or fingerprinting. At mayroon ding risk descriptions and recommendations. Ang scanning is a subsection ng vulnerability assessment. Using manual scan, gagamit ako ng Nmap or network mapper. This time, ang target ko ay isang Windows machine from a try-hack-me na blue room. Nmap scan the host discovery, OS detections, services, and using available NSE script. To start, itatype ko yung Nmap dash is C for the default scripts and dash is V para sa ports, services, and versions identifications, then the target IP. As a result, meron siyang port 445 na open, which is as ismb or a share files na posibleng vulnerable against Eternal Blue since naka-Windows 7 ang machine. Also, makikita rin natin ang messaging signing is disabled, so ito ay vulnerable. Maliban diyan, makikita rin natin ang computer name. To validate kung vulnerable nga ba ang target host, gagamit ako ng available na scripts ng Nmap, which is ismb-bon. As a result, the target machine is vulnerable to MS17-010 at may CVE na 2017 or 2017-0143. A remote code executions or an RCE. Ang remote code execution exploit ay nagbibigay ng attacker or pen tester ng administrative rights or privilege sa target machines nang hindi nangangailangan ng user credentials o user interactions, kaya yung risk factor niya is high. Gamit ang databases ng exploit DB, i-verify ko kung meron bang existing o available na exploit para sa 2017-0143 at base sa result, merong tatlo. The double pulsar, which is nung 2019, an RCE na internal romance nung 2018, and RCE 2017. At makikita natin ang code ng exploit at maaaring ma-download para magamit sa target machine. which will be covered on the next video for exploitation. Gamit ang nbd.nist.gov, makikita natin ang karagdagang informations regarding on the vulnerability of 2017-0143, kung anong Windows OS version ang posibleng ma-exploit. Kung inyong nagustuhan ang video na ito, huwag kalimutang mag-like at share sa inyong mga kakilala na nagnanais matuto ng cybersecurity, ethical hacking, InfoSec, and IT para lalawak ang komunidad ng Pinoy InfoSec. Proud to be Pinoy. Para sa inyong mga katanungan, huwag mag-atubiling mag-iwan ng mensahe sa comment section. Kung gusto mong mapanood ang kabuuang video ng GSEC, i-click lang ang Pinoy InfoSec. Kung gusto mong mapanood ang kabuuan ng Cybersecurity Analyst for Entry Level, i-click ang InfoSec Beginners. As always, stay safe, stay secured, at maraming salamat. Antabayanan nyo ang susunod ko na upload sa mini-series ng Penetration Testing for Beginners.